Jourdain's text, it's still relevant to us today. But Jourdain was also resting on the grand legacy of the Enlightenment philosophers, German philosophers, and the poets, starting with the famous poet Schiller, who actually thought, in the end of the 19th century or so, he thought that even Germany at this time, that's beyond the Renaissance, that's beyond the Age of Enlightenment, even Germany at that time has no future if it didn't look backwards. And his expression says, the Greeks are what we were, they are what we shall become again. Meaning you take that history, project it onto the future, and then you have a glorious future to work for. He was not alone, by the way. Nietzsche said something quite similar. He said, it's our luminous guides are the Greeks. So, and that again is not a joke. These are people who are talking in the 19th century in the construction of the new world and the new sciences, and they really understood what it means to actually connect with your own proud history and be able to project it as an aim for the future for the young generations to follow. Now, the 19th century itself, I say, witnessed some very remarkable events. One of them is, in fact, the establishment of this institution. This institution, we should not forget, was actually a high point of high enlightenment in an area that was swimming in darkness at the time, and it was who actually put the first beacon of light into the area and created the education and the institution that we now have. By the end of the 19th century, it inherited also the previous events that had taken place a little bit earlier, including, for example, the famous center here of the Arab world at the time of the Islamic world, and its famous invasion by none other than Napoleon. If you remember, by 1798, the hoofs of the horses of the Napoleonic armies were right in here in the midst. If you were living in this area, you have to stop and say, what happened to us? Why are these horses around here? How come we got defeated? So that question was started at that specific time, and I think it continues to puzzle us as we will see. Luckily, the Napoleonic invasion, luckily or unluckily, I don't know, the Napoleonic invasion did not last very much, because by 1805, it was Horatio Nelson who actually defeated the French armies and sent them packing. So at least now we inherited two fantastic colonial powers. We have the French on one hand leaving that, and then the British on the other hand replacing them. This was the situation in the 19th century as we actually see it, defeated people and people to liberate them from. But not every single dark cloud passes without a silver lining. The occupation of the Egyptian land by the Napoleonic armies accidentally turned a stone that we call the Rosetta Stone. Up till this very day, this stone is still sitting in the British Museum. Not because the British found it, but because the British took it from the French when they occupied Egypt. And hence, our treasures are still in those museums that sit in the European powers where they are lost. This stone is of tremendous significance because, as you can see very quickly, it is composed of 3 languages. It is the hieroglyphic at the very top, and then the hierarchic, and then the Greek in here, which means for the first time, we had a text and a guide on how to read hieroglyphic inscriptions. Hieroglyphic inscription was a closed book until this stone was unearthed and was studied. But the story of this stone does not end in here. The person who actually published in the 1920s the results of his studies of the stone was a man by the name of François Champollion. I hope you can see him. And this statue that we have it is in front of the gateway of the Collège de France. And that Collège de France, for those who don't know the hierarchy of French institutions, the Collège de France is as close as you can get to the thrones of the angels if you are up in the upper heavens. Any academician, name any academician who knows a little bit about France, they all dream of being at the Collège de France. This is the place to end. And Champollion was put at the Collège de France, and he established actually a department of Egyptology. And that is the birth of the discipline of Egyptology through Champollion. But not all the credits should go to him, as we'll see soon. Now, as you will see also that this is the niche where he is there. But if you look closely at the statue, you will see, despite his benefits, despite his graceful translations of the hieroglyphic in here, look closely at this. Every time, by the way, you see a statue anywhere in the world, you should stop and look at the statue and see, what did the architect mean to tell you with this statue? There is a message in every single statue. And in this specific statue, the architect wants to tell us, look where Champollion is resting his foot, is resting it on the head of a pharaoh. This is the same pharaohs that we see them in the tombs of Egypt. And this statue is a declaration that we own this civilization, that we are superior to this civilization, we conquered this civilization. You don't need to speak. You just pass by that statue in front of the Collège de France, and as an Arab, you feel humiliated. This is specifically the message that the architect wanted to tell us, and this was not a wasted message on generations to come after that. It's not accidental then. By the 19th century and early 20th century, we begin to have books of this nature. Shakib Irslan writes, لماذا تأخر المسلمون وتقدم غيرهم? Meaning we internalized by then the defeat. We said that the culture is defeated, and now we need to look for what else can we do. And he is not alone. Shakib Irslan did not finish with this. Others, by the way, even in the Atlantis, which is a very recent journal, also devoted an article, the Arabic world turned away from science. And why? So the image that the Arab world, Muslim world, they are not in the science business. They are in something else completely different. You see it all over. Even the famous economist devoted an article to say the tragedy of the Arabs, and they can only rescue themselves from within. And if you continue, you'll find even The Guardian. It says the decline of Arabic science needs another explanation. We need to know what happened to this civilization. So the question that was raised by the posture of Champollion with his foot on the head of the pharaoh is still echoing up till this very day. We still don't know what happened to this civilization and why did it lose the momentum that it had. Of course, the question itself generated many myths. One of the myths, it says, because Arabic is not a language that produces science. Unfortunately, by the way, this kind of talk was generated by themselves, including people like Ibn Khaldun, to say Arabic تصلح فقط للأشعار, meaning you say poetry in Arabic, but you don't write science in Arabic whatsoever. And people who are selective as to what do we see in Arabic would actually repeat this echo, and this is a kind of internalization of what colonial minds told us, that actually we don't deserve to live because we don't even have the means of expressing the language of science and rationality, and Arabic is a disastrous language, and hence we are doomed with it. So from the very beginning, we see that we don't have a chance. And these are corollaries, meaning this attitude have a kind of conclusions that were drawn through the 19th century. It says Islamic science only preserved classical Greek, as Mr. President Khoury had just mentioned, that it is only a big freezer. We just put knowledge into this freezer, and then one day Europe is going to wake up, so we take the chicken out when we cook turkey. That kind of law of visualizing the role of cultures has been ingrained, and unfortunately it's still ingrained up till today. There are people up till this very day, you might not believe it, who will say Arabic c'est une langue sauvage. Up till this very day, the expression still reverberates, and lots of people still believe it, and defeated cultures usually defeat themselves by internalizing this kind of thought and this kind of thing. Also, there were other people who said if it's not the language, it must be Islam itself. And they point, of course, to the poor but very generous, extremely intelligent human being by the name of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, who happened to write a book that he calls Tahafut al-Falasifa, not Tahafut al-Falsafa, as everybody keeps reading it. It's a mistake. He actually was arguing against the falasifa who misunderstood falsafa, and they made mistakes in their understanding of falsafa. And this poor Ghazali also wrote a fantastic book called Ihya Ulumuddin. And people, by sheer shuffling of the cards, they said, this man attacks the falasifa and then attacks the sciences and then preaches Ihya Ulumuddin. Therefore, it must be this religion that killed the science. Of course, the model they had in mind is the model of the confrontation between Galileo and the Catholic Church, which they had also generated it in Europe and kept thinking about it in Europe. Now, all of these, I said, conclusions were hastily drawn. And I want to take them apart and hopefully find some way out of them. First, when we speak of the unsuitability of Arabic for the language of science, I can immediately confirm to you that since the earliest Arabic texts that were written in Arabic, we find them having no difficulty whatsoever handling the most difficult astronomical Greek texts that were ever written. The Greek text that you see here on the bottom is the text of Ptolemy called the Almagest, and in book 4, chapter 3, which was translated by Al-Hajjaj ibn Matar in here, Al-Hajjaj discovers a mistake in the Greek text. He says this cannot go because in Ptolemy he tells us if you take this number of so many days separating two lunar eclipses, divide them by the number of the months the moon has circulated around the earth, you will get this answer, which is the length of a lunar month. As we all know, the length of a lunar month is extremely important for determination of the calendars, determination of all sorts of other things. And Al-Hajjaj, when he was translating the Greek text, he says, no, we should divide those numbers that actually Ptolemy recommends, and he divides them and he ends up with a completely different value, which happens to be the correct value. So those translators were not freezing the Greek material, they were not toying with it, they were reading it very closely, and they were competent scientists to be able to check its mistakes. I hope, and I promise you, Mr. Jabir, I will find an answer. One of those days, I hope, before I die, I want to know who taught Al-Hajjaj ibn Matar how to correct the Greek text. Hajjaj was writing in about the year 820, just about in the middle of the Ma'mun period. And there, as far as we know, there were no famous mathematicians and astronomers to teach Al-Hajjaj. But he learned the Greek, he learned the astronomy, corrected the Greek, produced a text that is impeccable for us to use. And that man, we need to know a lot more about him. We don't know that much about him so far, but we hope we do. So this is the kind of Arabic. Hajjaj had no difficulty whatsoever rendering the most difficult Greek concepts, correcting the Greek concepts into a flown language as you see it up there on the top of the page, and it is just fine. So Arabic did not hurt him, and Arabic was fine. Around the same period, a man by the name of Muhammad ibn Musa, those are not Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarezmi, who is very close to them in age, but this is Muhammad ibn Musa ibn Shakir. This Shakir had 3 kids, and he was a highway robber, by the way. It's a guy who really made his living from stealing stock markets and things like that, or the equivalent, or stopping people on the road and taking their money away. He has these 3 kids. He entrusted them to Al-Ma'mun. Al-Ma'mun decided to educate them. And one of them turned out to be a first-rate astronomer, that's Muhammad ibn Musa. The second, that's Ahmad ibn Musa, turned out to be a first-rate geometer, meaning a muhandis. And the third one turns out to be min ashab al-hiyal, i.e. a person who understood exactly how to make mechanical engineering. Those were brilliant phases at the time. It is Muhammad ibn Musa in his very first treatise that he writes about the period also a little bit earlier than 850. He writes in here in Arabic describing how the spherical spheres carry the planets and how they move. And he, again, as you notice, he had no difficulty coining Arabic terminology. Coining it, he speaks of al-markaz ma, al-hawi mukhtalif, al-mutammim, and so on. So why should the language stop you? And those people were producing it, and they were not hampered by the power of the language, as powerful as it could be. But then, also in the same treatise, the same Muhammad ibn Musa, what does he say here? فَقَدْ اتَّضَحَ أَنَّهُ لَا يُمْكِنُ عَلَى وَجْهٍ مِنَ الْوُجُوهِ أن يكون خارجا عن فلك الكواكب الثابتة جسم مستدير يتحرك بحركة خاصة له ويحرك بها. Original statement of the Greek astronomer, and now Muhammad ibn Musa says, no, you were wrong. It is impossible to have a sphere that is up in the skies that fits the description that you have already described for us. And hence, I read it as an early objection to the Greek theories that were being translated. And Muhammad ibn Musa is saying, we need a different astronomy. You can't take this astronomy and build on it because it has these mistakes built into it. And as a result, as Abu Bakr al-Razi, he writes a whole book that he called Kitab al-Shukuk, but Shukuk ala Jalinus, the great physician of the Greek tradition. Abu Bakr al-Razi says, oh, if you read, now I collect them all for you in a book that he calls Al-Shukuk ala Jalinus. So in other words, this doubting tradition now becomes a tradition within the Islamic civilization itself. And a generation after that, you have another book by the famous Ibn al-Haytham who says, Al-Shukuk ala Batlamyus. So the meaning the major scientists of the Greek tradition are shredded to pieces now, and nobody was preserving the Greek tradition. They were shredding it and rebuilding it with their own new interpretations of how science should be operated, what should we do with it, and that is what these people were producing at the time. And then if Arabic were to be a real problem for writing scientific material, I invite you to look at this text that was written by a man called Shamsiddeen al-Khafri, who died in 1550, meaning in the middle of what we call the age of decline in our civilization. Remember, everybody says after Ghazali, the civilization went into decline because Orthodox Islam took over, and from there on, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and that's it. We finished with it. This man, Khafri, who died in 1550, was still producing first-rate mathematics, produced actually descriptions of models of the movement of the planet Mercury of such complexity without using even diagrams. He is using sheer linguistic descriptions. He uses the material in Arabic, through Arabic, forcing people to rethink the astronomy that they had inherited, and now the Arabic did not seem to have a difficulty for him. Now we look at the religious role. If Ghazali actually killed the scientific spirit in Islamic civilization, then me as a historian, what am I supposed to do with the works of all those people that I have actually reclassified them as the people whose work deserves to be the golden age of Islam, which is all post-Ghazali period, and I'll give you only some of those names. Look at them. Every single one of those died after the period of Ghazali, and every a tremendous material for us. What do I do with them if I were to believe the story that there was no science being produced? Shall I bury these things and say, forget them, this is age of decline? Shall I look at them and study them and say, our supposition about the power of Ghazali killing science needs to be doubted again? And actually every single one of them, including the famous Ibn Shatir that the Mr. President has just told us, who influenced directly the works of Copernicus. This Damascene astronomer who lived in the Umayyad mosque and who produced enough for somebody like Copernicus to copying them, making a mistake in explaining them. This is how you catch the thief, by the way. When somebody takes a model and describes how it operates, and he does it correctly, you can say, well, maybe he discovered it independently. But when somebody takes a piece of work and tries to describe how it works and makes mistakes, then you catch the thief. And you say that is the point, that he really did not understand what he was talking about. He was taking it from Ibn Shatir, and that is our best proof for this. So if this is the case, neither the language was an impediment, nor Islam was an impediment. So what really happened? Why did we get into the era that we are in? And let's not kid ourselves. We are not in a brilliant era. We are living in the depths of the age of decline. And that, I am not covering it up at all. As a matter of fact, I'm inviting you to think about it so that we realistically know what happened. If we don't know realistically what happened, we will never be able to get out of the pit. We are in the pit, and we need to climb out of it, and hopefully we should know. And the best guide that I have found so far is the by Adam Smith. He said, has been, as you see it, discovery of America and that of a passage to the East Indies by the Cape of Good Hope are the two greatest and most important events recorded in the history of mankind. This is not trivial. He is identifying something that we keep forgetting. Historians of science keep thinking which formula they didn't solve correctly in mathematics. They keep forgetting that there are all sorts of social factors. There are economic factors, there are political factors, all sorts of factors that we should look at them. And Adam Smith was smart enough to say that the discovery of a new world like America, the circumambulation of Africa, are tremendous improvements for human civilization. They produce very, very important results, and we should look exactly at their effect. And if we look at their effects, indeed we find the very important results. Before the discovery of America, the main trade routes all across the world, you can see them crisscrossing all major Islamic cities, and that's the Islamic world that was there. And you all know, we are all Lebanese after all. We all understand what it means to have a trade route. Once there is a trade route, there is money to be collected somewhere. Somebody is making money, somebody is getting rich. So that, as a result, if all the trade of the world, before the discovery of the Americas and the likes, were crisscrossing the Islamic civilization, wealth was here. And if there is wealth, you are going to produce. And the production now is capital, and then you'll be able to get out. But right after the discovery of the New World, and meaning the discovery of America, look what happened. You see the trade routes, all of them now are gone over the Atlantic. Now they go around Africa. They avoid the Islamic world. What does it mean when you stop having trade? You go bankrupt. It means that you really go under. And that going under now actually has repercussions. Adam Smith also said the significance of the in the 15th and 16th. Their consequences have already been very great, which has elapsed since these discoveries. It is possible the whole extent of their consequences can have been seen. What benefits or what misfortunes to mankind may hereafter result from the great events no human wisdom can possibly. Political movements, they don't appear tomorrow. It's not like a cook and the pot overblows, you turn off the heat. These things take about 500 years, sometimes 200 years, sometimes longer to have effects. And when you see the effects, then you can actually take them over. And now, in our world here, what happened is immediate after that. You can see between the years 1500 and 1550, the old Islamic world was splintered because of poverty. Once you are poor, children bicker among each other if the family is poor. They begin to blame each other who did the wrong deal. And then we have the Ottoman Empire on one hand, you have the Safavid Empire here, the Mughal Empire, the splintering of the Islamic world, and immediately, the minute you splinter people, they will fight across the borders. All you have to do is look at the present borders that we have all over the Arab world, Islamic world. Once you have a border, you have a war. Right there at that border, and that border now begins to be the major thing that you see in your view. Smith also forgot to mention other consequences of the discovery of the New World, because the discovery of the New World, by the way, brought to Europe tremendous amounts of gold and silver from the Latin Americas and from the Americas, which were two precious metals that were becoming very thinly distributed over the old world, meaning the old world was in need of gold and silver. Now, all of a sudden, Europe has tremendous influx of gold and silver, and once you have capital, Mr. President, as soon as I have capital here, I'm going to build a science center. But I need lots of capital for a science center so that children from high schools, from elementary schools can come and toy with instruments, look at the planetaria, look at the skies, get inspired. These kinds of things, and build them if you don't have the capital. You have the capital. And the results of this also, that science began to be organized as a business. That is very, very crucial shift intellectually. See, once you begin to make money from an object or from a trend, you immediately institutionalize it, and then you try to make more money. We all know, and we know friends who are capitalists and all that, and we know capital drags other capital, so brings things into the movements, and hence science was organized as a business as a result of this. Also, once you have a business and you like to retain the benefits that come from the business, the immediate thing that follows are monopolies. Because once I make some profits, why should I share the profits with somebody else? Unless if there is a moral reason. Remember, in the Quran, in the Prophet's message, man ihtakara kafara. And then it says also, if you deprive your other fellows from the knowledge that you have discovered, عَلِمَ عِلْمًا وَضَنَّ بِهِ جَاءَ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ مُلْجَمًا بِلِجَامٍ مِّن نَارٍ. So we have moral reasons not to actually monopolize. But apparently, the European Renaissance and thereafter, immediately after, they found no qualms with this, and hence the birth of science, the modern science that we know as an organized business, flourished here. By 1477, the Republic of Venice issued the very first patent. Patent is just another word for monopoly. And it is actually the way to make money from an intellectual enterprise. And none other than the famous Galileo, the father of modern science, he actually made a patent on an instrument he claimed that he could discover, which now we can document it clearly, that he got it from Arabic sources for about 200-300 years before him, and we know that this instrument was not the discovery or the work of Galileo. But he popularized it, he sold it to the army, to the Navy at the time, and when his student, Baldassar, to write for it a manual on how to operate that instrument, he sued him for incursion on his patent. This is the father of modern science, by the way, suing his own student for infringing on his patent. And that is not a trivial thing for a guy like Galileo. Also, it produced the birth of academies. Once you have tons of money, you can actually now bring into a room 100 scientists and say, look, tomorrow morning, you don't have to worry about your breakfast. You don't have to worry about educating your children or supplying for your family. I'll give you all the income that you want. You don't need, just sit and think. You put 100 scientists in a room and ask them to think. One of them is going to produce a brilliant idea. That one idea will commercially be enough to fly the academy and to bring commercial profit. And hence, as a result, science will no longer be an investment in loss. it will be investment into the future. And hence you transform science into an investment enterprise. And that, the first academy, for example, the Scientific Academy, which was initiated in Italy in 1603, the Accademia delle Scienze, one of its early members was also Mr. Galileo. He was there. Money. He was there. And actually, if I tell you a bigger joke, I hope I have enough time, but I'll give you a little bit more. Galileo took his telescope and he turned it onto Jupiter. And he found that there were moons that were running around Jupiter. With that telescope, he could have gone home and written a treatise and says, the Aristotelian universe has just collapsed. Because I have seen evidence, it is right there, Jupiter now is the center of motion rather than the Earth, because I see the moons moving around Jupiter. He didn't do that. He didn't go, he was not searching for the reality of things. He went home and wrote a letter. He said, look, I found these moons, I am willing to call them after you if you give me money. See, Galileo was a smart businessman at the same time. And then the French says, no, I don't know how to do it. So he wrote to the Pope, he didn't give up. He wrote to the Pope, he said, I will call them the papal stars if you give me money also. The Pope says, no, no, my kingdom is in a higher universe. I don't want to worry about it. He didn't give up either. He went to the Medicis, the famous trading families of Florence, and he says, I will call them the Medici stars if you give me enough money and income for the rest of my life. And the Medici says, you are most welcome into Tuscany. That's how Galileo ended his life, on that discovery that he made, instead of actually milking the significance of it, the philosophical significance, that if you have a body out there playing as a center for motion, that is a destruction of Aristotelian world. He peddled them, he made money from them, and he spent his life drinking wine. Societies also, by the way, every single self-respecting institution, by the way, including this Lebanese institution, I hope you all had a hand in the establishment of the Lebanese Science Academy. There is such a thing, by the way, for people who don't even know about it, but it does exist. The Lebanese Science Academy is imitating others. Every self-respecting institution actually creates an academy. But missions, enough funding, and enough support so that they will create. And that creation, you don't burden them to go and teach and then on the weekends come to the academy and make money, or make new discoveries. Those academies were all, by the way, it's not accidental that the French Academy, the English Academy, the Austrian Academy, all of them were founded between 1600, 650. So all of those are not accidental. So for modern times and for the foreseeable future, what do we see of these movements in history? What I see is that now science is becoming and continues to become an engine of making further money. It's no longer seeking the Aristotelian certainty. Remember Aristotle, he wanted to tell us, we wanted to know the truth of things as they really are. Well, that was good. That is good dream, you talk about it. But now the scientists are saying, I want to produce science that satisfies this pharmacological company to produce a specific medication so that that will make money. So now science is really an engine of making money, and it will be so for the foreseeable future. I do not know any modern scientist who is not driven by the grants that come from corporations and from pharmacological companies. And similar, every single industry, by the way, they have an office in the industry, a branch that is called science and research, or science and development, research and development. You call it all sorts of different names. All of that is to employ scientists to produce further commercial material so that they can profit with it. And this is the engine that drives science now and will continue to drive it for the foreseeable future. Finally, I think we should realize it, that science is no longer a patronization process like the caliph, give you some money, you write a book for it. And that is just a gift. Science has been reconceptualized to become an investment tool. The bankers, every time I visit somebody in the bank, they tell me, We have new tools now. What do you mean you have new tools? He said it's CD, it is ID, it is some other phone. Meaning it is ways to invest your money. And now the science has become just another tool to make money, and this is for the future. Science will be like that as well. I finally come back to this famous stone. This Rosetta Stone, Champollion, by the way, who claimed that he discovered it all and he read it all, he was not the first. He was beaten to it by this famous young Englishman. And of course, years of dispute between Champollion and this man who discovered the reading of the hieroglyphics went on in it. But Mr. Young did not have the army of the French Napoleon behind him or the position at the Collège de France to actually create the image that we look at. Here, Thomas Young said, despite the fact he deciphers that, he did not create the posture that cultures, some of them are underneath, some of them are above. Some step, some are stepped upon. So this ranking of cultures came really from the Champollion mind, which is a brainchild of the French occupation and the French colonialism of the time, and it stays with us. I think this is my last slide, except to say, what is the mission of the Farouk Jabre Center now that I would like to do? I would like to invite you to actually, that the Farouk Jabre Center will not trade in these rivalries, who did what and what mistakes were committed. Instead, I think I would like us to build a new, fresh vision of cultural history. Will undertake to charge and investigate such aspects of Arabic Islamic civilizations where facts replace myths. Arabs did not invent the zero. Everywhere I go, people tell me, oh, you guys, you invented the zero. No, we did not invent the zero, but we did something much more tremendous than this. It was the Babylonians who invented the zero. We should give them credit. And hence, we would like to know what really happened so that we can build a new history on the actual things that actually developed, and we can do them. We would like to actually stop blaming people or judging them by their religion, by their language, and by what have you. We will look exactly on what is the truth that is behind them and not the prejudice that we inherit as we have done. Finally, we will have all conclusions based on objectively verifiable facts, meaning I will get you the pages from specific manuscripts where Arabic was used, where Greek was corrected, and hence we will see that shukuk were raised in the Greek tradition. These are indisputable facts. I will show you where Copernicus made a mistake in reading the models of Ibn Shatir. These are also indisputable facts. This is the kind of material that we should search for and to be able to construct a new cultural vision for our youth. Hopefully, they will participate in the discovery of that, and hopefully, they will produce better results than they have inherited. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Farouk. Thank you.